How's it going, guys?
It's good.
We're good.
Christian, Courtney, doing all right?
Yeah.
Saw you guys have chickens at home.
Yes. New chicken owners.
New
Yeah.
chicken owners. Any eggs yet, or?
No, we got to give them a couple months, but
Yeah,
we'll
just
get
got 'em,
there.
huh?
Yeah. They're little babies, so now they're moved out into their coop.
Little Rhode Island farm going.
Yeah.
Trying.
Yeah. We got the pumpkin patch. We got the raised beds.
Shh.
We're doing it.
Wait till your friends from DC come and see all that. And you're like, what happened here?
Yeah. Who are you? Yeah.
They're jealous.
Well, I really wanted to talk to you guys. I just think the story of what you lived a few years ago with Haley Grace, your first daughter, who God took from your wombs. She was never born, but do you ever think about, or how, I'm sure you do, how often do you think about the fact and what it will be like when you do see her?
Yeah. I think about that a lot. I think we thought about that like every day of my pregnancy with her.
Yeah.
We just gained so much from such a short amount of time of being with her and knowing that she has had an impact on our life before we even got to see her face. And I just can't wait to thank her and show, and I mean, everything that her stories, all of the good that has come of it is so powerful. And I can't wait
Talk
to
about
just
it.
talk to her about it.
Yeah. What do you think that's going to be like? You ever think about it, Christian?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I think a lot, like Courtney said about you know, I think contemplating what heaven meeting anybody is going to be like is going to be
Yeah.
strange, but certainly
Yeah.
yeah, something I think we pray about pretty frequently and
Yeah.
think about a lot.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you say the perspective, Courtney, because like I think about my experience. I'm sure your experience, but it's probably a little bit different with your other two children. But when you're first pregnant, especially your first, you're thinking, first of all, you're thinking about, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. And what's pregnancy going to be like? It's going to be uncomfortable. And then birth. You're thinking a lot of those things, which are important things. But like, you don't really, I guess, especially dad, it's hard to think too much about that child. You try to, but it's like, it's not in you and caring. But you guys right away had to start. It forced you to think about what's really important
Yeah.
and who she really is, not just like the stuff around it. And that's really all of life. When you think about it, we think about, oh my gosh, we can get the kid to the soccer practice, like we were talking about earlier. But it's really, and that's all that stuff's important, but it's really not in comparison to who our kids are, or who our family is, and who God is, But I wanted I was reading some of your blog posts that you wrote during that. Obviously, I didn't know you guys then. You were in DC 2020. What a great year. We'll get into that. Made it a whole nother complication to it. But I actually, in probably one of the more rawest ones, I actually want to read it to you. And you wrote, one day, maybe all of this will make sense and we'll be able to see the path that God was leading us down. But right now we can't. And it sucks and it's painful. So writing is my outlet. That's why I'm writing. It's not the best writing. I disagree with that, by the way. I think it's amazing. But that's not the point. These are real and raw emotions that I'm living through every week. This is my life in its most vulnerable state. I mean, that's right there kind of expresses how you were feeling. Like, I know God's doing something. I just have no clue what it is. And I know it sucks. What's that like feeling that way?
I think especially during that time, like our faith was strong enough to know that there is going to be purpose. But when you're just sitting in like the hardest part of your life that you know so far, it just becomes this pendulum of like, let's put all of our faith in the path that we can't see. Wait, but this really sucks right now. Like, how am I supposed to keep moving forward? And just getting through those dark days and trying to pull yourself out of that and trying to look for a light out of a tunnel that seems extremely dark is just trying to find that balance through that time period was just kind of overwhelming at some points because all of those emotions come in and out and hit you at different points, and then throw a pandemic on top of that. And the only choice we had that helped us was turning to God.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like what I not loved, but liked how you put it, that I think people need to hear is, I trust God, but this sucks. Like you can say that, right? Like this Bible's full of those kinds of prayers. And I think sometimes we don't think we can. And if we don't think we can, we not run from God, but we sort of, I guess, can partition ourselves off from God, because I can't really tell you how I feel because I don't feel really great. But but if you can recognize, no, I can feel this way and trust God at the same time. And that clearly is how you were from day one. Take us back to, because you're 20,
I was 25 at the time.
25. And are you the same age?
26, yeah.
26, yeah. So ripe age of mid-20s, living in the city of DC, working, living, and married for how long when you get pregnant?
3 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
You guys Irish? What's
Yes.
going Yes. All right. But not expected, right?
No, not expected.
Yeah. So what was that like?
Horrifying. It was. I remember when
You had a plan, 3 years, something like that.
we're so young. Like, sure, we want kids down the future, but we weren't ready for that. I remember we first found out we were pregnant. I cried for 2 days, being like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we're pregnant. What are we gonna do?" We were in this small apartment in DC. And then we were like, "Oh, okay. You know what? We have good jobs.
Yeah.
We can do this. We wanted to be parents. We're gonna figure it out.
Mhm.
Like, we're gonna do it." And then all of that came to a screeching halt for us.
What was going through your mind? I got to be a dad.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw a statistic, and I could be wrong, but it's like I think the average age of a pregnant woman in DC is like 36 or 37. So like 25 isn't like that young historically, but in like DC, 25 and 26 was like really young.
Everyone started looking at you like, what is wrong with you?
We were the first ones of our friend group.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was like, I mean, to Courtney's point, like we were blessed to have great jobs, but kids in DC are expensive. Kids in DC are really expensive. And so, I mean, kids are everywhere.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
there was a little bit of
To get
like,
more room and a place to live. You said you were in a small little apartment.
Yeah. And then within like a couple of weeks, we moved next door to try to find a place that had an extra room that technically wasn't even a bedroom. It was a den that you could use as one because it had a closet, and trying to scrape pennies together to make that move. And
we're working 70-hour week. I mean, we worked all the time. It's like, how is this gonna work?
Yeah.
And so you started to get excited. You're like, you got off the initial shock. I'm like, you know what? This is actually pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you find out there was something wrong? Like, tell me what happened there.
So we had gone to an appointment, like the pregnancy confirmation sonogram, and at that point she was like a grain of rice, but there was a heartbeat, and we're like, wow, this is so great. And we had one for like 4 weeks later to see the progression and everything like that. And it was a 10-week appointment, and we're excited because we're like, okay, after this ultrasound, we'll have new pictures, and maybe we can tell our friends after that.
At that point, now.
And we went in, and the ultrasound, we're like, oh my God, it's no longer a grain of rice. Like, this baby actually looks like a baby. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And after that, then we waited to go and see our doctor right after that to check in and, see how I was doing and everything. And she shut the door, and she's like, it's just burned into my brain. And she's just like, we saw something that concerns us. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, we just saw the baby. Like, they looked great. And
Your doctor?
this was at my doctor.
Yeah.
And there's an indicator
And
early in
Christian's not
pregnancy.
able to be with you for this.
This one, he was.
Okay.
This was
A week before the world shut down.
Oh, okay.
this was like mid-February,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So that's good.
yeah. Yeah. So he was there because everyone you heard the word COVID, but you're like, oh, it's not
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Anyway.
yeah.
And they're like, there's an indicator in fetuses of a thickness of fluid in the back of their neck. And if anything, I think it was like over a millimeter, was an indicator that something in their chromosomes might be wrong. And so we had no idea what it meant. We had no idea what we were possibly going to be dealing with. And we left that doctor's office after taking a bunch of blood to be sent off for genetic testing. And then the very next week, we went to a high-risk doctor in Virginia, at a hospital there. And they did more testing, more ultrasounds. And that was at 11 weeks. And I knew it wasn't good when the doctor didn't come in, but the genetic counselor came in.
I didn't even know there was such a thing.
Yeah.
I guess you find out these things when you don't want to, right?
Right. And so then she tried to like talk to me. And at that point, the world had shut down. And I was in there by myself and had to call Christian. And we were just sitting on the phone with this doctor and the genetic counselor. And they're like, your baby has Turner syndrome, which means that the X chromosome out of the double X chromosomes for a female is missing. And in our scenario, the outcome, because there are people that live with Turner syndrome, and they live fairly normal lives. And so, you know, we were kind of hopeful that like that would be our case. Like, okay, something might be wrong, but
what are the complications if you can live with it?
You would need some hormone replacement therapy to like get a child through puberty.
Yeah.
They have little like more health risks, so you got to be a little bit careful, but you might never know that somebody has Turner syndrome.
Right.
So when we found out that she had Turner syndrome, we were hopeful then that that could be our outcome. But when we went to Virginia Hospital Center and the genetic counselor came in and sat down with the doctor, they're like, there is a 1% chance this baby will survive, and you very likely will not make it to term. And this baby you'll probably miscarry this baby within like the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Was that 11 weeks?
This was at 11 weeks. And they're like, we're actually surprised based off of like how much fluid was building up all over her body. And they could see it around her heart and around her lungs. They're like, we're surprised that your body hasn't miscarried this baby yet.
So what goes through your mind? Probably don't remember.
It just, I wish I didn't. Everything just stopped. Like I just didn't believe them. And I kept being like, okay, but what if it's not? And they're like, no, like we're telling you 1% because we can't tell you 0. And I remember just like running out of the building and just like,
where are you at this?
I'm sitting in a car in a parking lot.
Yeah, that's fun.
Good times.
Jeez.
yeah,
So you have to go out and you guys just
we just cry.
Yeah.
It was so unbelievable for us because, you know, like we had finally like accepted that we were going to be parents and we're getting excited, and for like the balloon to pop that fast for us, it didn't seem real. Like everybody had healthy babies. Like, what do you mean my baby's not healthy?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think there's definitely like you don't realize how many people go through losing babies until you lose a baby and people start telling you that they also experience that. But I think like what stood out to me was to Courtney's point, there are people that like have Turner syndrome, and like I remember like my mom when we were like kind of figuring like maybe this is what we don't know yet, but maybe like I got sent. My mom sent me like a list of like people, and there was like an Olympian who like had Turner syndrome, and like so it's like no, this can be like totally fine. Like she might have a hard time conceiving, and she might be short, but who cares? Like
Yeah, right.
we'll deal with
Yeah,
that
they
in
were all
20
small
years.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Courtney sort of said it. The doctor was like, "No, it's 1%," and I'm saying 1% because I can't say zero. Like you're not having this baby, and we were like, "Well, you don't know that."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, because I mean, obviously, a lot of people do. Miscarriage is a whole other thing. I mean, but at the same time, I mean, do you ever think about like not would it have been better or worse, but just how different it would have been if you had just you didn't know any of this, didn't go through, and then you miscarried, which is absolutely horrible, and you grieve that absolutely too. But it's like, but you had this sort of like maybe, and you're carrying a child. I mean, what was that like?
That was kind of the point that we were struggling with my entire pregnancy because I carried her for 22 weeks.
Yeah,
And
that wasn't just a few weeks.
no, it was 6 months of pregnancy and you know, going to the doctors and then being like, well, 1 to 2 more weeks, 1 to 2 more weeks, and you're trying to prepare yourself. And I had to go every week for heartbeat checks.
Mm.
And I remember after my first one, and I was going to check out, and I said I needed to make another appointment. The receptionist, because again, heart of COVID, they're like, "Do you want to just do the telehealth thing?" And it was so uncomfortable to be like, "No, I have to come in here because my baby might not be here next week." And
It would
like,
have been nice to have a little note somewhere on a file.
yeah, yeah.
Don't
And
ask them this.
it was just
Yeah.
like, it was just such a wild thing. And we struggled with that of like, that was a lot of our prayers of being like, God, if you're not going to give us this baby, please take her, because every day with her, every checkup that she's still here, and we're thrilled that she's still here, but it's going to make saying bye a lot harder.
Mm.
And then, so we wanted the relief of knowing that she would be home with the Lord versus just wanting to hold on to her as long as possible because it's our child.
Of course.
So
Yeah.
hard to strike a balance with that.
Yeah,
Possible.
I think there was always. I mean, I don't know. It's because I'm the guy and I'm not in the room because of COVID or whatever. But I think for me, there was always a lot of like, all right, Lord, show that doctor, like, be the 1%. And I think, looking back, it was probably pretty obvious that that was never the case. And the doctor was in her own way trying to be sympathetic. I mean, in her own way, she was also probably saying, you could just end this and be done with it, which was obviously not really on the table.
Did they
for us.
ever? They never really directly said that. They
No,
just kind of said there were options.
No, they
They
said that.
they said it to me in the 11-week appointment. That they're like, you can terminate now and not deal with this. I'm like, that is not my just choice to make. That
Yeah.
no, I don't care. You could tell me 0 and
Right. Well,
because
let God do it.
yeah, because she held on for 22 weeks. So
She had a good old time there.
yeah, I was like, so what? Like, who am I to? And this beautiful story came of her.
Yeah. So now that you've had a few years, when you think, because it's very specific to the question of why, God, wouldn't you just take her instead of letting me deal with this? Do you have any thoughts on it now? Or is it still the same? Why, God?
No, we thought about that after Luke was born because we got pregnant with Luke very, very shortly after Haley was born.
Yeah. Were you
And
trying to do that? Or-
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, I know now more than ever that I want to be a mom,
Mm.
and I didn't want to wait.
Yeah.
And there would be no Luke without Haley.
Mm.
And thinking about that, and he's the best little kid, and
Mhm.
and then with that timeline too, and then we wouldn't have Emma.
Mhm.
And the other day, it like gets me more choked up than a lot of things talking about it. Margot had texted me, and she had just found my blog. And I hadn't read it in a while, so I went back and looked at it. And when I was writing it, I wrote the first like 4 or 5 all on the same day. I was just mind dumping everything that had been going on.
Mm.
And I wrote those on April 20th of 2020, or excuse me, April 7th of 2020. Luke was born on April 7th of 2021.
Oh, wow.
And so I was at work and I like broke down crying, and I just now almost 4 years later, I'm like, God had set apart that day for me to be a very important part of my motherhood journey. For me to start writing the blog about Haley and have that same day, a year later, be the day that my son is born.
Mm.
Like little things like that
Yeah.
just keep popping up that I'm like, this is why. Like, I know that there was a purpose. And I remember another day about a year or so ago, I had like such a strong feeling that I needed to go back and reread a lot of my posts. And I was like, I don't know, like it was so certain that I needed to read that.
Hmm.
And later that day, a friend of mine had posted how she lost a baby like midway of pregnancy. And her and I connected, and I was like, I now know it was God being like, hey, can you brush up on that? You're going to need to help somebody.
Yeah.
And there have just been so many little moments of like, it's for us to tell this story and to help people, because none of it's easy.
Mm.
Like this type of loss, this type of pain that you don't expect to go through, you shouldn't go through. Like it's your child. You think you're going to get to raise them your whole life. And there have been so many times that from us being vocal about our story, we've seen it help people. And that's the biggest blessing we can have.
Yeah, I found that with miscarriages, I used to have this Ask show that I did, and I actually had Lauren on who had miscarriage, and it was our most viewed by far. And I think, I think it's because we have this, I'm not taking a rabbit trail of abortion, right? I'm not going to take that on this episode, but we have this weird climate where it's supposed to be okay for a baby in the womb to die, because if not, what does that mean, right? And I think it's weird for people, and like, should I say, like, is this really, am I really to more like, that's your child,
Yeah.
right? You feel that child moving, that child is forming, and it has a soul and is made in the image of God, just hasn't reached the point of birth where it's outside of the womb. But I think it's like, do we talk about it? Do we not talk about it? And so I think there's a lot of, and I'm sure you've seen this because a lot of just people hurting and don't know, like, I'm not supposed to be, or I'm not supposed to talk about this because it's not real, or however the world makes them feel.
Yeah.
And that's a real shame.
I think too, a lot of times, and I think this needs to change in culture, like when people have miscarriages, it gets whispered about. Like
Yeah.
people are like, I'm so sorry. And it should be the same level of grief as anything else. Like say it out loud.
Yeah.
Like hug that person.
Right.
Don't
Right.
shy away. Like it's real pain. It's real loss. And I think we need to give each other more grace.
It's not a second class loss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was my point. And I think that's part of it, is like, well, if that's real loss, then the other's true too, that we shouldn't end these pregnancies.
Yeah.
And we have this whole debate of all this stuff. And I don't know if that's the only reason, but I think it's a major factor. Exactly what you experienced is, I see it all the time, or I've seen it in many cases. And and so having people like you being vocal, when someone says, oh, I can talk about this, this really hurts. Just like if my baby had died, with SIDS, it's the same thing, Yeah, the more you get to know your kid, probably the more painful it is. Your 13-year-old dies, it's even more painful because you've known him for 13 years, but it's still a loss. It's not a second-class loss.
Yeah.
Christian, with you going through, sitting in your car, knowing what Kortni's going through, that's your wife, that's my kid. Like, what was that like? I mean, I can't even imagine. I would have like felt like breaking down the walls and saying, "Screw you, people."
I think there was definitely times of that, and definitely feeling like if this gets to the point where we're like delivering and like,
Yeah,
you know, they're gonna like, I think that was probably a different conversation, but
yeah,
yeah, like just sitting on the phone waiting, like, I mean, there was times where Courtney would be like, Christian, can you hear that? And it's like, well, no. Like, can you put the phone closer to like the microphone so I can maybe hear the heartbeat, like, or not the heart, like, I don't want to. So I think it was definitely like, I mean, it sucks, you know, it's what, on one hand, it's like, am I trying to be strong for Courtney? Am I also sitting in this car about to break down and cry? Like, what's the, yeah, it wasn't fun. I don't think it would have been fun being in there either. But I think it certainly wasn't fun being sitting in the car on the side of the road, like outside waiting for pickup.
yeah, yeah. Did you feel like, because I know being a dad with a daughter that you haven't held and met yet, right? Like, there's a bonding that mom goes through carrying the dad is. I remember the same thing with my kids. It's like I didn't really feel like I was a father until, but for you, like how are those emotions for you? It's like I know I have a daughter and I'm just as sad, but I'm trying to support Courtney juggling that.
I think I think one yeah, I mean I think a big part of it was how do I support Corey? What's my role in this? And I think just in general, I'm probably a guy who's bad about listening and not offering advice, and sometimes I need to be better at that. I think that Courtney would say that's still probably a flaw.
That's a
Uh,
problem in most men. So
yeah,
I'm with you.
but I think, you know, how do I do that? Well, I think at the same time, something I was wrestling with was like, what is the spiritual life here? Like, you know, I think we all can say like, yeah, I know this baby's in heaven, but when you actually start wrestling with like what happens here,
Mm,
like what does scripture actually say about it? That was, I think, because I didn't, you're right, I did, you don't feel like a dad.
yeah,
I think a lot of dads will say they don't feel like dads until they actually have the baby. I certainly didn't feel like as much like a dad to Luke until Luke was born.
sure.
But so I think there was a lot of the like, what does this all mean?
Yeah.
That I had to navigate for myself, while also like, how do I be strong? While also like, goodness, we're cooped up in this 800 square foot apartment for the next 6 months, and this is awful.
That's another thing, right? It's like COVID. It's like you can't really, you're not supposed to be with friends. You can't go to work. I'm assuming, like mostly at home and dealing with this. Like, I had to have felt like a jail cell at times.
Yeah, we
Was church all online?
yeah, church was all online.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was, we talked about that a lot, being like, man, like this pandemic is heavy enough in the world, like just as it is, like there's no toilet paper, there's no nothing, like just like trying to deal with like the reality of that and not getting to see anybody. And then,
Somebody's still got a lot of toilet paper in basements.
oh, somewhere for sure. But then for us, like we couldn't physically have that support system because we had a great support system of our friends, but not being able to see them and hug them and
Mm.
lean on them, that was really hard.
And credit to our friends, they did
Oh,
a
they,
lot of like, we would go for walks, you know, standing 6 feet apart while we walked
know.
down through a park.
Then gradually became 2 feet, and I'm like, what
Right.
is this?
yeah.
But
We
you know,
all did the same thing.
they definitely did try and be there for us, but it
Yeah.
is like there's only so much you can do when you're stuck inside, or when you're like, you know, not supposed to be close to people.
But when, 'cause I remember reading somewhere in one of your blogs, Courtney, when did you tell people? Because you were at the point where you wanted to, but then you hesitated on it.
So we had a core group of our really close friends that we leaned on them really early on before we even knew anything. Like we were just too excited to hide that with them.
My advice to people is always you tell those people that you would want to know if something does go wrong.
Yeah.
Then you should tell them, right? Because that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Just maybe don't put it out on social media where I was in a pregnancy. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
Explain this, right? So you had your close
Yeah,
friends
so
you
they
told.
they knew.
How
And
many
then
about people is that? Like,
so there was like 4 of them,
Yeah.
and then our families knew.
yeah.
Um, but then as we got further on, and that was when you would just have Zoom calls with your friends and like,
Well, weren't those fun?
yeah, to catch up with people.
Netflix watch party.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
And I just remember like Christian and I sitting and it was just so uncomfortable to be like, guys, we have to tell you something. Like, we're pregnant, but like, couldn't let them go, oh my God, because
Yeah.
you had to cut them off
Yeah.
or they could get excited and then trying to explain it all and relive that, which is why I think too, I started the blog. Like, it was really therapeutic for me to be able to write everything down. That was just a
Was that
really good
just on a
outlet.
blog site people could go to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just like, can I keep these words somewhere online? And the first thing I found, and then because telling people over and over again of the constant updates was for my mental health, like I couldn't keep doing that. So whenever I would write and I would just post it, I'm like, here's the latest.
Mhm.
That way I could just keep people in the loop of what was happening and save my own mental health.
Yeah, and I bet that was really helpful because in reading those, you really were able to give people not just medical updates, but updates on how you're doing.
Yeah.
And some in person, you're not always going to do that. With your
Yeah.
closest friends, maybe, but you can just be tough. I'm strong. I'm good. I'm fine. I'm dealing with it. And you are, but you also have this whole thing going on that if your friends see that, they're like, we got to be there for you.
Yeah.
And they were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you wish you had told people sooner? Looking back?
I don't think
Besides
so.
the close, yeah.
I think we needed to figure out
How many
what was
weeks
going
about
on.
do you remember? Like, how long did you go knowing?
I don't
I think
remember.
when I told like publicly 14 weeks. I mean, maybe before that, 13.
Yeah, maybe 13,
It wasn't
14
too
weeks.
long.
No.
Yeah, it wasn't too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's only so much people could do. Email you, text you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So was there in those kind of early days, and actually at any point, your faith's strong, right? Was there times where you're like just angry with God?
Yeah. I think a lot of it, like the initial thoughts of like, what the heck is happening? We didn't expect to get pregnant. Okay, we got pregnant. Okay, we came to acceptance of being pregnant. Why are you going to take her away?
Mhm.
Like, it was just a lot of confusion and just dealing with so much in the moment. And I don't know if it was like, it wasn't anger like directed to God. It was just feeling angry, and some of our prayers were just like a tantrum. Like, just that's what it felt like. It was just being like, I don't get it. Like, what is happening? Like, why is this happening? What are you doing? What is this path you're leading me on? Because it didn't feel real. It didn't feel like it should have happened to us. And like, we would listen to a lot of our church sermons, and a lot of the messages that our pastor was saying, like, felt so pointed to us. And like, I remember one of them being like, God just doesn't wing it with your life. Like, he's not just being like, oh, let's see what happens to her one day. Like, he knows what's going on. And I think that was something that we had to just keep reminding ourselves on. Like, there is purpose. But yeah, it sucked.
Yeah. Courtney brought up like the church services, and it felt like it really did feel like, every week was like the pastor was like speaking to us. And it was like kind of funny looking back, being like, can't wait for church. Like, I'm looking forward to church, but I also am like dreading the fact that I'm probably gonna be crying in 20
Look
minutes.
over at each other and be like, are you
This is-
crying too?
This is awesome. Loving this. So But yeah, I mean, I think to your question, I think it was a lot of like, what the heck? Like I didn't want this. Like I wasn't trying to get pregnant.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
got okay, so
Yeah.
we're here now. I'm on board, and now I don't get to be. But now you're also gonna make this drag out for 3 months.
Mm.
Like I think it was a lot of I don't know if it was anger, but it was definitely like
Exasperation.
what's the deal here? Can we just make a decision and be done with it? Like
Yeah.
I can't see what you're doing, and it's ticking me off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every week, heartbeat check, sitting in the car. You got to go in. And it's just like, what are we doing?
Hmm.
Oh, man, that must have been when you prayed those prayers. Did you, um, how did, like, say you're praying like a tantrum prayer, as you said. Do you remember how you felt after that? Did you feel like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit closer? Or did you just feel like God's just, it's like, I feel a distance. So a lot of people will explain it that way sometimes, like a, almost a coldness that they feel sometimes in those moments. How did you
Yeah,
feel?
I don't think I felt a distance. I think I knew that like I wouldn't survive if I didn't fully put my faith in whatever God was doing.
Mm.
So I think it would feel more like, okay, got that off my chest. And then I'd be like, okay, I'm okay right now. And I'm probably gonna come yell later. But like it was just in those moments, like that was the only thing we had that we could do that we knew was also the right thing to do.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I think it would just feel like I got it off my chest.
Yeah, I think the opposite of feelings further apart actually. Like
Yeah,
I
you
think
felt closer.
closer. Like because I mean I think there were points in my life where I was certainly taking some grace, taking advantage of grace and not, nurturing the relationship with God the way I should have. And certainly, at points in my time in DC, you know, job was the cool, like I was focused on my job and everything. And, that can be on the back burner. And I think even if the prayer was a little whiny, even if the prayer was what the heck, like I was talking to God more than I had talked to God in years.
Mm.
And it was like, I, even if I didn't know what was happening, like I knew so, like God was in my life in a way that he hadn't meaningfully been, he had always been there, but I wasn't taking part in the relationship
Mm.
the way I ought to have been. And certainly that was, it definitely, as much as it stunk, it brought me closer,
Mm.
in my faith and made my faith way more real than it previously had been.
Yeah, so it's like God used that to, like he often does, his hard times to bring us closer to him.
Yeah.
Because you're like, before I was relying on all these other things. I wasn't really, but I thought I was.
Yeah.
Now you're like, there's nothing I can do about this
Yeah.
at all. Yeah. In that particular time, were there any scripture, like you said, some sermons, any verses that stuck out to you, or anything that you remember?
Yeah, Jeremiah 1:5 was like I was reading it like daily.
Mm.
Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you.
Mm.
That one like stood out because that was going back to like my previous comment about like what really happens, like
Yeah.
what I have to wrestle with, what this baby really is now. Like that one was a big one.
Yeah, it's one thing to cliche say, like you said, but you know, and that's why I asked you, like, if you thought about what that's going to be like, because I've had that question many times. All right, I have a baby, or I had a miscarriage, and like, is she a baby in heaven? Like, and I'm like, obviously we don't really know. I personally think at some point they're at the prime of life. They're not a baby. Whether he allows them to grow, I mean, like we just
Yeah.
don't know. But I do think you interact, and they're like we're all, because I mean I hope I'm not like 90. If I live to be 90, that ain't gonna be me in heaven. I hope not. New
Yeah.
body. I don't want that, right? So we're all kind of that's how. But it's all conjecture. So you're thinking through all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like we read 2 Samuel 12 a lot when David loses his baby, and how do you deal with that? And David's way of dealing with it, like, well, why would I fast anymore? Why would I cry anymore? Like,
Yeah, he was so upset the whole waiting for the baby to die.
They were so worried.
Yeah.
So worried when we're going to tell him.
Yeah.
And he gets up and give me some food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think those.
He says, I will go to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He will never come back to me, but I'll go to him.
Mm.
That Psalm 139, you knew my unformed sub before you knew my unformed substance. See, I brought the Bible so I could quote it, and then I don't even do it. Yeah, quote it accurately. But yeah, I think those three. I mean, there was more.
Yeah,
of
course. But
those three, I think,
and over again,
stood out a lot as like, okay.
And so do you think that's because of your work? Like, I really need to know that.
Yes.
That Haley's okay.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was definitely like it's easy for me to say like, yeah, your baby's in heaven. But then when you're actually wrestling with it, for me, that was definitely like a struggle at that point. And so knowing, like reading over and over and over again, like God knew this baby long before we knew we were pregnant. Right. God knows this baby today. God knows this baby long after his plans with us are done. And like someday we'll go there and we'll get to meet this baby. And to your point, I have no idea, like,
yeah,
will I recognize, like, because when Kortni alluded to it, when we finally held Haley, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
it was beautiful.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. She had these perfect lips and this perfect nose, but everything else was pretty rough. Yeah. And I got to imagine that's not what she's running around having.
That is not what she looks like. I'm confident to say that.
Yeah.
Any verses at that time for you?
The second Samuel one.
Yeah.
Like, I think for me, my struggles were more of trying to cope, like myself.
Yeah.
And so, you know, just being like, okay, there's nothing else I can do. Like, I will see her again. And like, so those types of verses, and it's funny, Christian and I were like literally just talking about those today. But yeah, I think I just needed that reassurance for myself of like, we'll get through this. I will see her again. There are a lot of bad things that happen, and there's a lot of stories of that in the Bible, and being able to see all of those examples and the coping that those people did. And, you know, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel upset, but then it's just like, okay, like, she's got it better than we do right now. So what's to be sad for? Yeah.
And remembering God loves her more than you do, which is weird.
Yeah.
Always weird for any of our kids, but he does. So it's like, okay. It's not like he's like, well, roll the dice here, or just see what happens. Or like your pastor said, wing it. Like, that's not what God does.
Yeah.
He loves her too much to do that, you know? And he loves you that much. So that's where it becomes a whole element of faith, because you're like, this does suck, but you love us and you love Haley and you love, so yeah, I just got to trust you. And the Bible is full of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't really, I mean, to think about it, you guys are mid-20s, you know, that's, you know, you weren't little children, but that's a lot. Like you said, you were kind of like, oh, living life, living the dream, you know. And not that you hadn't had any bad things happen, I'm sure, but this is suddenly a big ball of concrete landing in your life that you have to carry. Crazy, especially during COVID. Oh, so like, when did you start? Tell us what happened after that? Like when did you, was it getting worse and worse?
So, every like 4 weeks or so after, I think it got a little more frequent towards the end of my pregnancy, I would have to go back and keep doing more ultrasounds. And that's when like I could see things were getting worse, and it was hard too because
you got an expert at looking at them.
Oh yeah, I could.
Because I look
basically
at
have
ultrasound. I'm like, I got it.
Yeah, and it was getting harder too because I had a very like noticeable pregnant belly, and so people would be like, "Oh my God, congrats!" And you'd have to just be like, "Oh, thank you," and move on. And
does that make you like when you see an obvious pregnant woman like hesitate? Just say. Because, you know,
It makes me watch my questions a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like even when I had Luke, and people would be like, "Oh my God, is he your first?"
oh yeah.
I hated that. And I'll say he's my oldest, but I don't ever say he's my first because
Oldest.
Haley was my first.
Yep.
Um,
True.
and so I try to watch where those questions because you never know like people's stories and
Yeah.
try to be cognizant of that. And yeah, so when we were getting further along and I was going to these ultrasounds and I could see where all the fluid was building up in her body. I could see the spots around her lungs and around her heart. And they were constantly checking for blood flow in and out of the umbilical cord. And that was like what they said, like kept her longer than they anticipated. They thought that would be insignificant a lot faster. And it was just going through that, like you become numb to it. Like it was just,
About how many do you think times did you have to do that?
gosh, so many. Like
4 or 5
Four.
ultrasounds and 10 heartbeat checks.
yeah. And I remember one day, stupidly, I planned one of the heartbeat checks on my birthday. And like that was the first one too that they couldn't pick it up with the smaller Doppler that they normally did. And she had to roll in this like ultrasound machine. And I remember when I was just laying there, just praying to God, be like, don't take her on my birthday. Like this birthday already sucks. Like, please don't take her on my
And also, I
birthday.
don't want to associate
Yeah.
birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was still with us and stuff, but it like, it just,
Yeah.
you become so numb. And like, I remember we'd drive and the appointment, it's like, okay, how you feel? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know how I feel. Like, it was just so heavy and our new normal.
I know.
Yeah.
What did you do to distract yourself? Because you're
Bought a lot of coloring books because that's what you did during COVID. You bought coloring
That's what I did. I've never been a great colorer. Heather did her crafts, that's for sure. I was like, oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like walking around like the street and like I have this vivid memory of it being really hot one day, like
Mhm.
DC humidity heat.
Mhm.
I guess it was technically Arlington, but like, and I just like, well, I can't sit in this car. I'm just gonna walk until I get the phone call, and
Mhm.
like, just yeah, just not fun waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the day that we found out that we lost her, was it's just a different office of the same practice that I was going to. And so I had never been there and I had never seen those nurses or those doctors. And that light is blinking and I'm afraid to tell the story and have that end.
Change it, Steve. We'll just have her pick up
Yeah.
with on that day.
It's like I don't want to get into like the
No, but it was in the middle and I didn't see it blinking. I was thinking we're probably right around that. It's like 45 minutes, right?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh yeah. Ah.
Kelsey and Roberto texted us arguing amongst themselves about what the best Skittle flavor is. The people that are babysitting our kids at this moment have a group chat with us and they're arguing between themselves.
because none of us are responding.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion about that, Kortni?
Skittles are a terrible candy in general.
I don't know. I like combining yellow and purple in a bite.
That is very specific.
That was super specific.
Wow, you have thought about this.
I
I
don't
was
know
just
which
gonna
one is
say
the
like
main
red,
flavor.
you know?
Yeah, wow. That was weird.
Yeah, Skittle.
I've never seen you eat a
There's something
Skittle.
about Skittles that doesn't seem like that's real food.
Oh, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously sugar in there, but then it's just
Like Laffy Taffy with a shell. It's
Kinda.
good.
yeah, and it makes your tongue feel like
It burns. somewhere.
Yeah,
It's like almost like the sour kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we good? All right, good.
Okay.
All right, so So take us back to that day.
Yeah. So the day that we found out that we lost Haley, we were in a new office of the same practice that we were going to. And so I didn't know any of those nurses. It was a new doctor. And I remember getting in there and them doing the heartbeat check and not being able to find it. And that night before, I remember sitting on the couch and we were just like watching TV, like just hanging out, just the two of us. And I got extremely anxious and like started crying. And then Christian's like, what? Like, and I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just feel the whole weight of all of this right now. And it's just, I feel so anxious. And then when they couldn't find her heartbeat with the Doppler, they went and brought in the ultrasound machine. And I remember like I didn't even look, like I just stared at the ceiling. And I was on the phone with Christian and they were like, I'm sorry, there's no longer a heartbeat. And just like crying out to Christian to see if he had even heard the doctor. And like knowing in that moment, I'm like, I know that I knew that she died. I like,
So take me back to the night before though. So you have that anxiety. Did it go away?
it did, it was like, I mean, we sat together and it did pass, but it was spurred by nothing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and
So do you remember kind of going to bed and thinking anything like that? Or you're just like something?
it was, I don't think until I found out that she had passed, I'm like, that was it.
Yeah.
I knew,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that I knew.
Yeah.
And they sent out a nurse to go find Christian so he could come up because they were not letting any, like you had like go through like 3 checkpoints of
Yeah.
forehead temp things and all this stuff before you can get in. So they sent a nurse out to be able to bring him right back. And like, he just came in and we just hugged each other and cried. And then when we left, we had to wait for a call to figure out what time we would go to the hospital to be induced because I was 22 weeks pregnant. Like you had to birth the baby.
Yeah. So was there any sense of relief? It's over, or was it just straight out loss? And then was there guilt over feeling relief if you did?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was. Yeah, I think it was the. Okay, this is done, but
Yeah.
it wasn't.
No,
But
right. You still had that to do.
There,
Yeah.
it felt like there was. Okay. Not. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I felt guilt over that yet. I don't think at that point I felt guilt yet.
I think it was just like so much adrenaline at that point. Like we'd been waiting to hear that. And then like them actually telling us, I was like, oh my God, like, wait, what? Like you'd been telling me for 12 weeks that this would probably happen. And then now it finally did. But like, that was still, when we didn't go to the hospital till the next morning to go be induced. And it was 2.5 days before she was actually born because my body like wasn't reacting to the medicine to induce my labor.
Is that normal? Like,
I don't know.
really
I don't think so. I think it probably was a combination of like my body not knowing that
it's time to give birth.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it still being so early, like
Yeah.
if my body didn't recognize that she had passed.
Yeah.
But yeah, she like
So you're in a hospital. You're both there
mhm,
for 2 days,
mhm.
just waiting.
Yeah.
What was that like? Indescribable, but try.
Yeah. I think we were just like numb to it. And I don't know. It was just like the weirdest
I think it was just
limbo of
tiring.
yeah.
Like it was just exhausting. Like you're just.
We thought it'd be quick. Like we were like, okay,
Do this. We'll
Yeah,
get through this. We'll mourn this.
yeah.
And you're just
And
like,
like our parents were calling and being
Yeah,
like,
nobody
"What's
could
going on?" I'm
visit.
like, I don't know. Like I still don't. We don't have any answers. I'm still not giving birth.
wow.
Yeah,
They let you be there at least. You just couldn't leave the room, probably, right?
exactly.
Yeah, I could not leave the room. Yeah, but they did let me be there, which avoided some potential problems for everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, they were hopefully because at that point it's what month?
June.
Yeah, so they were at least a little bit less crazy by June, as far as just a
Yeah,
little bit. Summer,
Yeah,
some of the numbers are going down and all that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
but hospitals were still kind of nuts. So
yeah. And I remember, so we got there on June 18th, and it wasn't until June 20th in the morning, um, I had felt my water break, and I was like, okay, I think something is like actually finally happening. And in that moment too, like I realized that like everything was gonna change in that moment because like I'd been pregnant for 6 months and nobody thought it was gonna be. Like I was in labor for 2 days and nobody thought it was gonna be. I'm like, surely, like all of this is taking longer than everybody expected, like par for the course here. Like, and then once they started like my doctor came in, they like wheeled in all of like the tools for birth and everything like that. Like I was like, oh, this is real now. Like this is gonna happen and this is the end of it.
yeah, and what was that like?
It was hard. Like after she was born, they took her to wrap her up and everything for us. And like, I just remember Christian and I just like face to face, just crying and praying. And because like we didn't want to let go of that chapter, it was the hardest to live through and to cope with. But I didn't want it to end.
Yeah,
And like before they gave her back to us to hold, like I'm just like
yeah, I think it's just not, when that's the situation, it's not like the TV show Baby where there's screaming and crying and happy faces.
how long did it take about the labor,
The label,
15
the
minutes.
delivery? Yeah,
Yeah, it was quick.
yeah,
And so getting like snapped back into it of being like, oh, we're there for 2 days, and being like, oh wow, like
yeah.
right now.
And so do you see the baby right away, or do they?
they did a pretty good job of hiding her from us, which was probably
So she, because of
a little bit.
yeah, her body was just very swollen
Yeah.
from all of the fluid that she was retaining.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it was just a couple minutes that until they like brought us over, and we spent 6 hours at the hospital with her because then they still had it like I had an epidural and everything, so
Yeah.
I had to get my own body
Yeah.
back and be able to walk again and stuff. But it was 6 hours with her, and then
What was that like? 6 hours?
not enough.
Yeah. No, definitely not enough.
I think it was. I mean, that was my first opportunity to like,
Mm.
have any physical relationship with her,
Mm.
to the extent that she was there.
Yeah.
But it was. There were a lot of tears, but also like some smiling moments. There was still like look at how cute
Yeah.
her little lips are. Like look at her perfect nose. Like,
Her chin looked just like Christian, so there were moments of like, wow,
Yeah.
look at her.
and
That's
like,
our child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's even tinier than the tiniest baby
Yeah.
you see, but it's still like this is ours. And I think there was a lot of like, I just want to hold you. I don't want to let you go. I want to like think about who you are. And again, definitely intermixed with with a lot of sadness and tears, but also like some moments of happiness in that. Um,
Yeah. And I think that's hard. One of the harder things for like a stillborn loss, a miscarriage loss, any type of like child loss, like we were grieving a life that we had imagined we would have that we didn't get to have.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because we pictured ourselves being parents and wondering who's she going to look like? What is she going to be like? Is she going to be like strong-willed? Is she going to be like what are her hobbies going to be like?
But hearing you describe it, because I'm being a dad, Christian, and I here's how I think. You never know, but I feel like I'd be very focused on Heather because she's carrying the baby, and I know I'm a dad. And I'm grieving this too, but it's like she's, you know. But then I feel like that's when I would probably get angry. Not angry, like, but like because you see, like, I want to see this child smile and cry and do stuff because this is now like my child. Not that it wasn't, not that she wasn't, but like this is, and you're not going to see that. That would just be so hard for me.
I I don't want to get ahead of Courtney because I know that she has thoughts
Yeah.
on this moment too. But the moment I felt like
Yeah.
the typical like dad feelings was when we actually had to like leave the hospital after 6 hours.
You're like, I can't leave my kid.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like I'm gonna put you in this bassinet alone, and I'm gonna shut the door, and there's no one else in this room, and you're by yourself, and I'm
Yeah.
supposed to leave. And that for me was probably the toughest moment of the whole thing. That was like,
Yeah.
man, that was really hard.
Yeah, because you got two kids, two more kids now that are alive and well, and you never do that. I mean, put them to sleep, but like
Yeah,
leave them somewhere and just
Yeah.
walk away.
yeah,
Yeah. It was just, yeah, finally they're like, okay, like it's ready to go home. And we're like, you want us to do what? Like, and yeah, I remember like they had went and found, so Turner syndrome, um, the like colors and symbols and stuff for it is purple and butterflies. And so they went and found like a tiny little purple hat to put on her. And they like had a blanket that had, or a bracelet or something that had like butterflies on it. And like the nurses and stuff there were so good to us. And so she like looked like this perfect little doll, honestly. Like she was so small and like wrapped so beautifully, and to put her down and like walk out that door knowing that like it was a physical like closing the door of that chapter. And like they still did the silly like, oh, we have to put you in a wheelchair to get down to your car. And I was like, I just want to walk out. Like
Yeah,
I don't get to leave holding my baby. Like I want to at least walk out on my terms. And like, you're never supposed to meet your baby and say goodbye in the same day.
No.
I mean, like, I remember going home and hating being home and not pregnant.
Thus Luke came.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you do kind of funeral or anything like that, or what'd you guys do with that?
We didn't.
It was hard because no one could come anyway.
Yeah. We, all of the babies in that hospital, from any like miscarriages or stillborns that, they cremate them, and there's a special spot in a cemetery in Alexandria that all of their remains get placed. And so we've gone and visited, and I think just like knowing that there's a spot that like we can relate back to like her being there is comforting, but at the time it just didn't feel like the right thing for us to do.
Yeah, especially like I said. I mean, you got to do what you got to do, but like those are some really strange times
Yeah.
with with any kind of funeral. I did a few. It was like, you can't sit near each other. You got to wear masks. I was like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
It's like 8 people. They're the same family, and then the funeral homes had that rule. So I could see where you're just like, that's not going to be helpful. This is the whole idea of doing that, is having a bunch of loved ones and friends and all that, you know.
Yeah.
So at that time, what's the prayer life like? Does it get better? Does it get worse? Was it the same? Was it more numb? What was it like?
I think fairly shortly after that, our church had started to open up again, 6 feet apart, masks and all that.
Yeah.
But it had opened up. There was some ability to be back. And I remember emailing our pastor who, knew us, but didn't know us all that well because, we had started going before the pandemic, but not long before the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
to this new church. And then the pandemic happened. So it's like he knows of us, but not super well. And I just emailed them and I was like, hey, this just happened.
Mm-hmm.
I just needed to say, you've been such a spiritual blessing. We feel like you've, just God's been speaking to us through you, every Sunday. And I just, had to say thank you. And
That must have been so encouraging to him, because speaking into the stupid camera as a pastor, it's like, who the heck's listening to
yeah,
this? So it must have been, I mean, hard for him to hear, but also to know.
so we show up at church at 9 a.m. the next morning or whatever, that Sunday. And we've got the masks on and everything. And he immediately beelines over to us. I'm like, I wasn't even sure you were gonna recognize me, man. I know you know who I am, but with the mask and everything. And he's like, I made sure I knew what you looked like on Facebook, and then I found the hair. I found your gray hair.
On the hair.
And he was like, you're never gonna believe this, but me and the wife have a babysitter today and no plans tonight. And I'm like, you're right, I don't believe that. He's like, you're coming out to dinner with us. And so I do not think that just was random.
No.
But he took us out to dinner that night, and it was just it was, you got to get more involved in small groups. You got to do this, that, and the other thing, and we're here for you. And
Keep yourself busy with things that are going to feed you.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I would say that was a good part of getting more involved in church again, and certainly I don't think, I wouldn't say the prayer life or I wouldn't say it didn't regress. I think we've certainly only gotten closer to the Lord in the months and years since. But yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did.
Anything what did I miss?
What about you, Kortni?
Yeah, no, I don't think it
So now you're grieving. I mean, you're obviously grieving those weeks, because 1% could be 0%, but you're also not, because she's still there.
Yeah.
But so maybe it's equatable to having a loved one on hospice or something. You're like, well, we're not grieving yet, but you're preparing for grief, I guess.
Yeah.
But still, it becomes really real at that point. And so how did that, or did that change your sort of how you were talking to God?
I don't think so. I think during the pregnancy, it was more of what are we doing here? Why it almost sometimes felt like torture of keeping me pregnant and stuff like that. And I think after she was born, I came from a much more grateful place of realizing how much I gained from that pregnancy.
Mm.
And after the first couple of days of just feeling heartbroken of everything that happened, I think it was just okay, thank you for giving her with us for 22 weeks. Thank you for letting us be in a position that yeah, it took 45 hours for me to give birth to her, but put my body in a position where I could birth her and we could look at her and see some of the amazing features that she had, and things started to feel lighter as we got just a little further away from it and could reflect back on that.
I assume you knew quite a few people who aren't believers. How are your conversations around this one, when things open up a little bit, or coworkers or people who aren't necessarily in your church, but but people who maybe don't have the same faith. How did you advocate that conversation, or did you? Because I mean, they're probably like, how are you even functioning, right?
I think, I don't think we ever really, I think because when I put out what was happening in our lives, the like first things were like, we know there's a plan, we don't know what it is, but God's working.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever opened the door for people to like ask or like be like, what do you mean? Like, how can you still believe in a God if he's putting you through this? So I think because we were so forward with our faith through this, that we didn't have many conversations.
Did you
like
find there
that.
was ever, or even since then, an opportunity, not necessarily to witness, like share the gospel, but like, I mean, that's a pretty good testimony, right? That you guys actually grew closer to God through such a horrible thing. Like, is that possible if it's not real?
I mean, I think it's just that, like, because of Kortni's blog, because of the fact that we've talked about it, so many folks I think we're a lot of folks, maybe not first, but first few calls. Like, I've gotten plenty of calls from friends that are like, hey man, like, this is happening and I don't know what to do. Or like, this is happening and like, I haven't told anybody yet, but like, I'm panicking. And I think that's my opportunity. That's been an opportunity to be like, I found a lot of comfort in Jeremiah 1:5. I found a lot of comfort in this verse or that verse or this story. Or like, have you read 2 Samuel 12? Like, I know you might not be a believer or you might not be thinking about this right now, but like, this is where I found my comfort. And I think that's certainly been an opportunity just because, in a large part, Kortni was so vocal about it that everyone kind of knew it, that we've just, for certainly a lot of my friends, been like, I don't know who else to talk to about this, but I know you went through it, so can I talk to you about it?
Can you imagine going through that without your faith in Christ? I mean, it's hard to imagine, but just people do.
No, yeah, I don't.
I mean, I think that's why you see people turn to substance abuse and things like that.
They
Like
gotta numb it. It's too painful.
Yeah.
And your marriage got closer through it.
Yeah.
I mean, you weren't married all that long. Relationship, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just marriage, but you're.
Yeah, at that point, we'd been together for 6 years.
Gosh, I didn't even think of that. Like, you're only married 4 months, so we're just thinking, oh wow, it's kind of soon to be pregnant. Those are kind of soon to be
locked in an apartment with somebody for
It's also-
pandemic.
locked into an apartment, going through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna make or break you, probably.
Yeah, probably certainly could have. I think it would be hard for something to be worse than that. Well,
Oh,
I know.
let me.
yeah.
Don't worry, God.
It was a good way for us the good Lord to test us. Well, not test. Can we cut this? I hate that. It was a good way for us to learn.
Yeah.
Sort of like to be pressure tested. You mentioned that verse, or the line from that sermon earlier about
Yeah. You can't reshape metal without applying a little heat. And yeah,
Sometimes a lot of heat.
a lot of heat. But it was for the better because, like Christian said before, like we'd praise God at our high moments and we'd turn to God in our lowest moments, but we live day to day for us. And I think this was the wake up call that we needed to be like, whoa. And it was of just being like, this is not up to us. Like, our lives are not ours. God has planned them out. We need to be better, do better, turn to him more. And since then, like, we've never looked back on that. Like, we recognize how much we took for granted without giving God the praise that for everything that he has done. And yeah, this is 4 years, and I don't think our relationship with God is ever been stronger. And I wish it didn't, I wish I had a stronger relationship with him prior to this. But if this was going to be the kick in the butt to get me there, then so be it.
It might be your answer to why, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know, but it's certainly an answer. Like, you're a better mom, better dad, better followers of him.
Hmm.
It can do so much for others because you went through this.
Yeah.
And you know, I always say to God, why can't I grow through good times? And his answer back is, ask yourself, not my fault.
Yeah.
It's because of you, right? But it's just true for all of us, even though. But it is true. You said praising God in the hard places and times and seasons. Not necessarily that drastic, but even the other hard seasons. There's something really beautiful about it. And it's something I think it's like being a child yourself, because we're always caught up and worried about, right? Like, okay, I got to do this, and I got this stress, I got this. But it's like when you're in that moment, it's like none of that. It's like, oh, like, and you're just like, you're just with God, like he's your dad, and you can just be two again and just be like, I don't know, help. And as hard as that is, sometimes it's like, it's just beautiful. You know, in those ashes, you know, the beauty from ashes, like they say, you know. So then you get pregnant with Luke 4 months later, not even.
Yeah.
Well, was a good way to cope too.
Yeah.
But so were you, I mean, well, I guess you're pretty good at getting pregnant. You got pregnant when you weren't trying. So,
Yeah.
you know. So what was that like, though? It must have been a mixed emotions, right? Like, this is so great, but terrified. What if this happens again, or something like it?
It was.
Is there? I mean, I don't know anything about Turner, so is there like?
It's not a genetic
It's
thing
just sort of
from.
like
I
a
was
roll of
just
dice type thing. Gotcha.
It's
So there
also-
wasn't that fear.
It's also like a huge percentage of miscarriages that occur they think are probably attributable to Turner syndrome. They just happen way earlier.
Yeah.
So it never gets to the point where we're talking about Turner syndrome. It's just you had a miscarriage early.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, the fear was, it wasn't fun going to, it was never fun going to ultrasounds again. That like image of,
Was it the same place?
It was, which it was good and bad
It's a
because
good way to saying.
we're like, look, we're back. But like,
This
just like
time?
PTSD of
Yeah.
like sitting there going, oh God, I hope everything's okay. And
Were you
like,
able to go at this point?
at this point, I was able to
Okay.
go.
we'd been there so many times too that they're like, hey, you're back. So, but it was really amazing. The doctor that I had there, she was so kind and so passionate, and she was so happy when we like went back for like our second or so ultrasound, and she's like, this baby looks great. And like you could tell like she was happy for us. And like after Luke was born, like I sent her a card with a picture of him being like, look, like you were with us with our lows, and look, now we have a beautiful baby. And yeah, but it was scary, and it's like doing all of the genetic testing again, and you don't realize, because there's so many healthy babies that are born, like you don't realize like how many things could go wrong, but you also take for granted all of the amazing things that go right.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. They
everything-
care less of it than they used to.
yeah,
Medical and there's things that you'd lose several babies sometimes, moms, you know, and it's like, man. But so praise God for that. But so as you're going through the pregnancy and Luke is born, obviously it's so joyous, but is there also still re-experiencing a little of the loss?
yeah, I feel like after he was born and stuff, and we'd be having like these beautiful new moments as a family, that like Christian and I would catch ourselves being like, man, I wish Haley was here.
Yeah.
But we couldn't have both. And because of Haley, we got Luke.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But still, you know, you could be like, well, you can think of it like that, but you can also be like, well, God could have worked it out, or Luke came later, and who knows how God works all that stuff out. So
Yeah.
you could be like, so it's like, but I think that's what loss is. It's like there's a goodness in the loss because it means she matters.
yeah.
If we didn't think like that, then well, her life does matter. And so there should be a whole. A whole's good, It's not, but it is because it means something.
Yeah.
And you're carrying that, and that's still a beautiful thing because it's like that is her that you're carrying. What would you tell people who are friends or family to someone going through that? Not necessarily Turners, but maybe something similar. Baby, kind of going through that, a pregnancy where it's not looking good. What would you do? What would you tell them not to do? Because people never. I mean, you've been on the other side of those things. It's like, what do I do? I don't. Do I say nothing? Do I ignore it? What do I do?
I mean, I think finding an outlet for you was so important, and it gave you an outlet, but also it gave you an opportunity to like minister in some small way to a lot of people that ended up needing it.
Putting meaning behind it.
And I think, I mean, people have like texted us just being like, people have texted me like, hey man, like my wife's found your wife's blog. Like it meant a lot to her. Like, and so I think like, don't be afraid to talk about it for you. And I don't want to put words in your mouth,
No.
but like I didn't have those 22 weeks. I probably can't, I would say, listen to your wife. Like stop trying to offer solutions. I did, and it didn't help. I mean, pray, read, like don't go through a global pandemic at the same time.
Yeah, avoid that if you can.
Yeah. If you can. We're all going to try to avoid that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and just support. If you know somebody going through it, just be a support no matter like what that looks like. Like for us, our friends and our family did everything for us during that time, and like I will never forget that. Like of the friends that brought us food, friends that donated to Turner Syndrome foundations, and everything in between. And I texted my friend the other day because when we were in the hospital and like we didn't realize we were going to be there for so long, like I didn't bring some of the toiletries that I was like, oh, well, if I was here for 2 days and I knew that, I would have like packed. And she drove out to the hospital and like left a bag at the front desk for us that had like snacks and toiletries. And in that was just this little thing of chapstick. And I still have that chapstick. And I think about her, and I think about a simple action of just bringing me chapstick when I was in the hospital. And I I took a picture and I texted it to her, and I was like, I think of you every time I put this on, and it stays in my nightstand, and I use it every night, and I think of you, and I think of that small action and how much it meant to me in a very low point. And so like little things like that, like
it's got to be.
Don't keep it to yourself.
Yeah. I think that's the problem, right? It's like you don't want to make someone more upset, but I don't think you're really going to.
Yeah.
I mean, don't ask a bunch of questions, maybe, unless you're wanting to talk and it's clear that someone wants to talk, fine. But if
let them lead.
Yeah, jeez, I don't know. Just kind of like, what do you need?
Yeah.
It can be the way to do it. It wouldn't matter what the situation someone's going through.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you decided to move back. How come?
Because I was pregnant and we lived in an 800 square
foot. We can't do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the market was behaving weird, and we weren't sure we were going to afford a house in another year, and we wanted to not be in an apartment in DC anymore. And once it was clear that Luke was going to be healthier, we just wanted to be closer to family and have a little space. And DC was getting weird at that point.
Everywhere was weird at the end of 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, you had riots going on too, all that stuff, man. Yeah, so you're like, let's go back to Massachusetts. It's consistently sort of awful, but not terrible.
Yeah.
Get some land, a few extra bedrooms. Yeah.
Couple chickens.
That's good.
Yeah.
And now you have Emma as well?
Mm-hmm.
How old's Emma now?
She'll be 2 in August.
Yeah.
She's already full terrible 2 age, but
so that's a beautiful thing too. You get to hold a second daughter now,
Yeah.
Luke was born, and that's one thing, big thing. But now it's like there is a difference between a son and a daughter. They're no better or worse, but there's definitely a difference,
Yeah.
I think it would have been,
especially for dad.
yeah, yeah.
You love your kid, you throw him around, your boy, but
Yeah.
your little daughter, it's like she gets you wrapped around her finger immediately.
I think it would have been hard though if we'd had if Luke had been a girl. Like it would have felt very,
Yeah. I would have been worried of like not replacing, but like
yeah.
filling a gap that was meant for Haley. Yeah, I'm very grateful that Luke is a boy.
God, it's like God knows what he's doing, huh?
Yeah, imagine that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, things you don't think about till you're going through them. He waited, gave you a very different sort of experience, and then Emma, yeah. And so you still find you're able to minister and able to help people going through this, and probably will always.
Yeah, and I think the further we get away from it, the more time that passes, the more things that we realize. Like it wasn't until last week that I realized the birthday date thing, and I'm like, I can't wait for God to keep revealing little ways that this is helping, and probably so many other people that have read it and it's helped, and I don't know about it.
Yeah,
And that can live forever on the internet, and
yeah.
just
We'll definitely have to share the links for those with the podcast too, so
Yeah.
people who want to read those. And hopefully this will be another way more people will be calling you now.
Yeah. But we're also like, we're not afraid to talk about it and relive it. And
Well, I really appreciate that, because that, people need help, and you really didn't have, I mean, you had great help. You had great friends, obviously, and family. But like having, because of COVID maybe too, it's like having people who've actually done it. That's really helpful to have someone like, I know you're thinking this right now. Oh, yeah, you read my mind.
yeah,
Yeah, because I was you,
yeah,
That's something that I can't do for something I haven't experienced. And that's beautiful when God, and I just thinking in terms of when you were talking about the night before and how you felt, like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just such a powerful testimony of we're not just this flesh and blood, like creatures, animals, like there's so much more to us that God has designed for you to know that as a mom, and just like there's just so much we don't know about it all.
yeah,
That's confusing and beautiful all at the same time. And it's just, you want people to realize, like, you're not just living this life of eat and drink and go do your job and die.
yeah.
There's so much more to it, Any last sort of, we covered a lot, so I don't expect there to be, I'm not asking you to come up with but anything that you feel like we didn't cover with the journey that God did, or
Anything we miss?
No, I mean, I think we covered it, but I just think it's remarkable how much growth I've seen in us and in our ability to I've just seen so much growth come from it. And like, I think there's a lot of times where it's like, well, I don't know why God did that, but it's like, I can very clearly say, like, look what's come of this.
Yeah.
And I don't know that everybody always gets that from their tragedies, but I certainly can say that I did. And I'm grateful for that aspect of it.
And it's hard, and it'll take time for people to be able to adjust the lens to want to look for the good that God has done through tragedies. But there's always something. You just need to want to be able to see it.
Yeah. And you still have those moments, I'm sure, where it's just you're reliving it and crying all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't go away, but you have to choose to see the light that the Lord's doing because of that work.
Mm.
And that's not always easy. That is a choice that you need to make, but it's worth it.
Mm. And I'm sure you've thought about sharing this with your other kids someday.
Yeah.
When they're old enough to share that, that'll be tricky and
Yeah.
Yes, tricky.
Right
got
now,
some good books out there now.
Yeah. Now we just see the butterflies that fly by, which is a symbol for Turner syndrome.
Yeah.
And we're like, hi, Haley.
Yeah.
Like that. We'll cross that bridge when we get there when they're
Yeah.
older.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming and telling your story. And I know, like you said, you've been obviously doing it from day one. So, but Christian's, not me. Let Kortni say it.
She's more eloquent than I am.
I
Thank
agree.
you for having
That's
us.
okay. Yeah. That's, because it's dad's perspective is very important. Very important, because it's similar but different too, that experience, So, yeah, well, hopefully this helps people and we'll get more business for you guys to be there for people, and minister. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're ready.
Cool. We'll go collect some eggs.
Yes.
We'll bring you some.
All right. Thanks for being on, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.